Welcome to our very first pandemic lessons webinar. It's extremely exciting to see you all here. Welcome, welcome. I see so many names and faces and avatars that I haven't seen in so long, and I'm just really excited to reconnect with you. And I was just saying to Tiffany and Laurel, this is one of the gifts of the pandemic, is that we actually can just like pop in on our lunch hour, or if you're on the East Coast, at 3 o'clock, and just check in with one another. So I'm really excited that you all are here. I'm going to put a link in the chat, and that is to a note taker that you can use for the wonderful presentation today. And we definitely just want to kind of utilize the time that we have. And so we'll just launch right in, even though we know people will be kind of joining, and we will be kind of giving them a little bit of grace. But I also just want to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from our speaker, Tiffany, and time for you to talk to colleagues in breakout rooms, and then we'll come back and we'll put it all together. So the idea behind this webinar series is, as we are thinking that we're going back to normal, kind of, somewhat, depends on where you live, depends on a lot of things, but it feels like we're coming out of this pandemic. Okay, just jinxed myself. So it feels like we're going forward, we don't know into what. Let me leave it there. I don't want to jinx any of us. But we've learned so much this year. And so for those of us who are reading apprenticeship practitioners, we have done so much work and thinking and designing and experimenting, and had some really extraordinary successes as well, moving our practice into a fully online forum. So before we revert back, we definitely don't want to just revert right back. We want to capture some of this learning and see, what does it tell us for the rest of our professional lives and personal lives as well. So if you have an idea for a lesson, something that you learned to do during the pandemic that you are going to move forward into your practice, just email me, Nika at 3csn.org or mhogan@wested.org. And you can be the next speaker for our series. For today, our speaker is Tiffany Ingle from Glendale College. And I'm super excited to hand it over to Tiffany to talk about how she innovated during the pandemic for her multilingual learners, and for us to learn from her practice. So Tiffany, over to you.
Hello, everybody. It's so good to see all of you. I see so many people I've met over the years, and it's like, hello, I see you here. I'm so glad to be able to share this. And so I'm going to be talking about something that I kind of started calling collection assignments. And it was just an experiment, and I'll tell you the whole story behind it, and kind of how it came about and how it's serving the students. But first, I just wanted to do some basic agreements for our time together, because this is a really fast little webinar. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to share my experience, my real experience during the pandemic, and it's a little messy. And pandemic teaching life has been pretty tough. There's been some challenges, I think. So now we're getting to that point where we can kind of celebrate that some of those challenges are turning into wins. So I think that's kind of what I'm excited about sharing today. And then I acknowledge that you might be light years ahead of me in this work on equity and closing equity gaps. And so please know that I know that. And then I hope that we can all really bring ourselves and our hopes to the conversation. We are going to have a breakout room time after I share the basics of what I've done, and then you'll get to brainstorm how you can maybe experiment with this as well. If you have something that you just desperately want to add to the agreements, you can go ahead and pop it in the chat, and I'll just wait for a minute. I also put a Google document in the chat, and it's getting, re-put there. And yeah, you can go ahead and do it. All right. I'm just looking at the chat. Hi. Hi, everybody. All right, I see so many people. All right. And I just wanted to kind of root us into, this is a West Ed webinar, and we are talking about reading apprenticeship. So if you are new to reading apprenticeship, that is okay. This is a good beginner kind of talk. But one of the foundational pieces of reading apprenticeship is metacognitive conversation, as it really pulls together our classrooms in how students are growing in that personal dimension and personal growth. And their identity as a learner, and then bringing together that social dimension. How are they connecting with each other, not just with the teacher, but with each other and with the teacher, and this dynamic interplay of how they grow socially as a person in our classes and with the content. And then that cognitive dimension where they're problem solving and getting this big picture, zooming out, zooming in, doing all these mental moves that are really complex and increase that critical thinking, and then building knowledge around new things and texts and all that extensive reading. So just to situate us in a reading apprenticeship conversation, I wanted to put this out there. And if this is new to you, please don't let it overwhelm you. Just kind of take it as information, and there's always more when we're working on this framework and using this framework. And so where I'm starting is with a problem. I had a problem when we went online. I was teaching fully remotely, and I just really wanted to increase metacognitive conversation, but remotely, when we're doing Zoom, one person can talk at a time. And when we're doing asynchronous, a lot of times students just wanted to talk to me and not each other. And so I felt like all of this wonderful data for like figuring it out language and conversations at tables that I would normally have in the face-to-face environment just evaporated. And I suddenly didn't know how I was supposed to like help my students grow in their own autonomy and agency and ability to do and manage more complex things over the course of the semester. I felt like suddenly I was stuck in this very linear box where I had to like, okay, I have to do step one, I have to do step two. And I wasn't able to really quickly transition to that. So after the spring semester 2020, I really brainstormed, how can I turn this into a process of building just like I would in a face-to-face class, but do it in a way that really gets my students doing more and doing more complicated types of work. And so I put together like a 5-week process in my head where I would start with growth mindset, and I would really lean on that, like effort leads to mastery, and we have to effort in order to get to mastery. And then talking about how do we build any kind of automaticity in our learning and in what we're doing, what we have to output in our skills and our knowledge building. And then I brought in reflection and strategy sharing. And so I just crammed all of these things into that first 5 weeks and tried to make it pay off somehow. And my context is that I teach in non-credit ESL. So our students really want language fluency. That's kind of what they say. Like, I want to be fluent in English. I want to be able to do my life in the world speaking English, so that I can, be successful as a business person or as a college student or just living in this country. Our program is non-credit, so it's open entry, open exit, which means students can join anytime throughout the semester and leave anytime that they want to, and there's no penalties because it's a non-credit program. So if you're not familiar with non-credit, it is an interesting retention experiment. And then there's lots of class time. There's 12 hours a week of class time. So instead of having homework, the students are just in class for about the same time that they would be in like a 4-unit class, but doing homework. And students are really serious about their English. They're taking this class because they want to improve, but they really struggle with time outside of class. So there's not a lot of buy-in to homework or doing complicated assignments outside of the classroom space. And so when we went remote, students really started opting out of activities because they didn't like them, or they felt they weren't relevant to their goals, or they didn't understand the steps to the activities, or they just didn't have time to do them well. So I just found that the students were opting out of activities that were really game changers. But normally we did those activities kind of side by side in the classroom with a group and figured it out together. So then I got deep into some grading for equity reading. And as I started reading this, I just felt like there has to be a better way to deal with some of these grading issues that create like a bad environment for students to want to do the work. And reading this quote really challenged me to think about learning zones that are grade free. Like when we don't have these learning zones that are grade free, it becomes nearly impossible to build an effective teacher-student relationship and positive learning environment. And so I want my students trying new things. I want them venturing into unfamiliar territory with the language. And I want them to be doing increasingly complicated things with the language, like writing complicated essays or explaining things with evidence or being able to critically think about a problem and apply language that they maybe didn't know before. And so I felt like, wow, this online classroom does not create this environment the same way that a face-to-face one could. And then in the book, there's this lovely little summary, and it just speaks to a lot of things that we're trying to do. Mistakes are necessary for learning. Growth mindset, we have to effort, we have to make mistakes, we have to experiment. Traditional grading, teachers are kind of nitty gritty, judging everything on a rubric. Every single thing is on that rubric, and I have to assign a point value to it all. And it's exhausting for me because I'm managing, like thinking about the points and the emotions and the affective filter. But then I'm like, but I need to give them constructive feedback and they need to be empowered to improve. So I felt like I was in the middle of this kind of storm of how do I turn like effort into something students want to do. And so I asked myself these questions. What if points are collected instead of like deducted? So instead of taking points away for bad performance, I thought, like, what if students just collect points by doing it? And that way they get a point for every iteration that they do. And then I thought, well, what if I give them a point whether the iteration is good or just horrible, like abysmal, but they tried, you know? And so I felt like that really showed some values. Disengagement could become engagement if they just did nothing or did it very poorly. Maybe after some feedback, they would do it better. I just wondered. And then I thought it would value confusion being okay, that if they turned in something terrible, they were still going to get a point and they didn't have to stay up until 3 a.m. in order to try and figure it out perfectly. And students could start where they really were without feeling like they're going to be penalized for every little thing that they didn't understand from the directions. And I thought, you know, maybe there will be more honesty in online work if they can turn in something that's not perfect and know that they're still collecting points for it, because that's how I imagined it in my head. Like every time the students do work, it's like they're collecting learning, but we're not communicating that through grades. And then what if I give rich feedback, but no grade at all? Is that going to bother them? Or is that going to help them focus? And so what I really wanted was for students to focus on the next iteration and not on the grade that they got and get shut down and feel ashamed. Then I was reading Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, and I love this part in the book where it talks about the way that feedback can really shape instruction, and that feedback, personalized feedback, really is kind of the most golden instruction that we can do because it is for that student. And that's why life coaching is popular, because we get individualized feedback from people. And so building this sense of I can do it, because they can confirm that they're making progress toward their goal. And in non-credit ESL, our goal is so far away. They feel so far away from English fluency, but they need to see that they're making progress toward that goal or they'll lose hope and stop studying. So there's a chart that gives some really wonderful information in the book. And so I highly recommend this book. But it gives these 4 points about feedback. It should be instructive rather than evaluative. So it can correct a path, or it can correct little things with the product and focus the student on the instruction that they need, like just-in-time instruction, which is already proven to be really effective. It's specific and in the right dose. So it's not about everything in the world. It's about specific things. It's timely. like maybe while the students are still doing the assignment, maybe they're going to get some feedback right in the middle of while they're working on it, instead of only at the end to evaluate what they've done. And it's delivered in a low stress, supportive environment. So it reframes errors as just information instead of your shame that you didn't do it well. So I thought to myself, what if I can chunk my assignments differently so that the students are still doing very rigorous work, but in smaller chunks where I can provide feedback pretty quickly, because I'm not providing it about a giant assignment. I'm providing it about a small chunk of an assignment. And then the students are still working on it. It's not done. They're collecting this assignment as they go, but they're able to iterate and respond to feedback within the assignment not being finished yet. And so that was my kind of challenge for myself. And so I used to use reading journals, which are so great. And everybody loves reading journals. We do presentations on reading journals, and I still love reading journals, but they had such a high demand for a non-credit student. And they were not able to do this in the remote environment with all of their life responsibilities. And so what happened was the students who did them significantly improved in their language goals, but so many students opted out that it seemed like it was an equity issue now. And in order to close the gap, I needed to make the effort more accessible to the students who were unable to maintain doing that assignment. Also, my grading often got behind, which was a nightmare, and it turns into a snowball that crushes you. And you all know what I'm talking about. All right, so I just ask myself, how can I still ask all these big things of my students? How can I increase the number of students who are efforting in a positive way and making progress towards their goals and saying, I can improve? And how can students opt in anytime so that if they miss a bunch of assignments, maybe they can just jump back in? And these were the 5 sections in my old reading journals. So what happened was that I decided to focus the students on the vocabulary building, which was their stated goal. In a survey at the beginning of the semester, my students said that they desperately wanted to improve their vocabulary. So I knew this was their area of most concern for themselves personally. And so I made that the work that they would be doing mostly outside of class. But the rest of it, I turned into in-class activities where I scaffolded the conversations where they were still doing all the reading journal things, but they were doing them during class in a very supported environment. But the vocabulary building they did outside of class, and we turned it into the collection. And so this is kind of a summary of what a collection assignment can do. And I decided it's really best for a really complex skill. It asks the student to do a task that will develop them in their own goals over a set time. Collect this many by this time. This many, I even did the math for them, this many for an A, this many for a B, this many for a C, and you're in charge of how many you collect and however many you want to do. And the students have free choice over part of the assignment. So they get to bring their own interests, their own desires into that learning situation. And then they just collect 1 point each time they do it. And they get a lot of feedback when they're doing their assignments. The nice thing for me is when I get behind in grading, if I skip a week and I am dying, all I have to do is just start over, and all I have to do is count how many they did, give them how many points, how many iterations they did, and focus the feedback instead of having to give feedback on every single reading journal that they turn in without fail and die in my grading pile. And so their grade is just the total number of times they did the assignment. So if a student has 13 points, that means they did 13 things. They did 13 iterations of the thing. And then there's ongoing reflection going on in class as a whole group, in breakout rooms, and they kind of develop their own system, their own philosophy. And so my assignment looked like this. We were reading Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. And I wanted them to collect vocabulary from the book that they were interested in learning that would help them to be able to engage the book topics more deeply in our conversations in class. And our conversations in class took the same form as the reading journals. There was a time for golden lines. There was a time for explaining your golden lines. There were times for responding and reflecting on connections in our lives. So we were doing all of those robust activities that would normally be in the reading journal, but we were doing them during class. And they chose 4 words each week. And then they completed a page kind of worksheet for each word. So that was their collection. Their goal was to get a total of 50 words by the end of the semester. So they had, I think, a total of 14 weeks to do a total of 50 words. And this is what their worksheet looked like. And it's based off of some research about vocabulary development, about productive vocabulary. So if you're a language teacher, there's productive vocabulary, and we want students to be able to actually use the words that they learn instead of just recognize them on the page. And so in order to get them using the word well, there's a pretty robust set of things that you can do pretty simply to be able to do that. And one of them is visualization. And here it is down at the bottom. So we spent a lot of time helping the students just learn how to visualize, and they collected images for the words that they were working with. To implement this, I did plan it out week by week. So in the week 1, I just introduced the assignment, introduced the book, and I taught them the concept about receptive and productive vocabulary so that they knew the difference. And then the whole class did this vocabulary assignment together during class time with the first few pages of the book. We had a Google document, we put the words, groups worked in breakout rooms using the dictionaries that I was suggesting that they use because they're great for language learning. And then we debriefed how we found the words and strategies we used to find the words and which words stuck out to us, which types of words are we interested in learning, what's going to be our philosophy of this assignment, what types of words are we going to spend time on, which ones are worth our time, which ones are not worth our time, and all these things to make it really owned by the student and have some choice. In week 2, we started our discussion of the book with tricky words, and we just made a big list. And in breakout rooms, the students did it again, where they found the tricky words that they thought were really important to them. And they did that in breakout rooms. And then every time they do their assignment, it's in a Google Cloud assignment. All they have to do is push the submit button when they add anything to their notebook. And for me, I only see one assignment, so I don't have to manage 25 little individual pages of student work turned in. But instead, I'm able to just see one assignment. Every time they add something, it comes there and I see what they've added and how many times they've done the iterations. And then on week 3 to 5, they were doing it more independently. And I gave them a lot of feedback about their words and whether or not their example sentences were correct. And I would give them a lot of feedback about how well it seemed like they were taking in the words and being able to use them productively. So it was focused back on this receptive versus productive vocabulary. In week 2, this is kind of what we did with the whole class. We had people choose words and they would write them in the blank as they arrived in class, like what were some hard words, and they just wrote them here. And then we all spent time kind of working on it and finding definitions, adding photos, and doing some work with those words. So this is how it kind of scaffolded in so that they could do it independently later. In week 6, there's a big shift. Students are like, I've got this figured out. It's kind of getting repetitive. It's kind of getting boring. So this is where we can really raise the metacognitive conversation about the transferable skills that we want to come out of this routine that they're doing. So I asked reflective feedback questions in the feedback that I gave to students. And I usually started with a lot of, I noticed sentences. I noticed you're mostly copy pasting definitions this week. Like last week, you didn't do that. And so we started a conversation about, is that working for learning the words? Which part of the assignment is helping your vocabulary the most? And usually they would just report back to me, you know, I was really busy this week. So yeah, you're right. I just copy pasted. I think it's more helpful when I find the images first, and then I can write the sentences. And they would kind of overcome their own bump just through that back and forth of the feedback. And then the last few weeks is a great opportunity for the students to become teachers and really share some of their proud work, share their collection with other students and all this awesome work that they've done. They also developed really cool strategies for how they learned the vocabulary and how they would use it after. So a lot of students started using their vocabulary in their free writing and in their essays. And I noticed a lot of this vocabulary coming up in some of the more complex writing that they were doing in class, some of the more rigorous writing that they were doing. So they were actually taking the words and transferring them to the real assignments that they had in class. And it became a really rich place for us to showcase some of that. All right.
Okay, here it is.
In the slideshow, which you do have access to, there's a little video of students talking in a breakout room, and they're talking about the words that they chose. And I'm not going to play the video, but I just wanted to show the words. You can always watch this video later, and they're just discussing the words that one student is sharing. But they chose words because I gave them free choice of these words. I was really worried, like, are they going to just choose words that are simple or not very interesting, just so they can knock out the assignment really quick and not actually have an engaging experience? And so this student chose the word jockey, and then
The person who writes.
I'm gonna kind of fast forward. They have a big discussion about the word jockey. And
it was
then
used as a verb,
the word
and
segregate.
it was on the page 22. Services women are segregated from men.
And
like
then the word
unrivaled,
insurrection.
something like that.
And so at this point, this was about week 3 of the class, and I was just astounded by the types of words students were choosing. And this was just one student's experience, but all of the students were choosing these types of words that were just so, it's like the pulse of the nation was in the vocabulary assignment. And it led to amazingly rich discussion. And I did not choose the words. I chose 0 of the words. So they had full freedom to do that. And it felt more relevant than any other vocabulary assignments I feel like I've ever done. That seems overblowing it, but it really, I was amazed by their choices. All right, so I just want to show 2 more examples because vocabulary might not be a part of your class, and maybe you're having a hard time visualizing, like, how could I do this for my discipline or something else? And so another assignment that was a collection assignment in my class was just a free writing notebook, where they were supposed to free write about topics. And sometimes I gave them kind of scaffolded topics so that they could integrate some of the other language goals that we had in our class. But sometimes it was just free, and they were supposed to collect 50 iterations of free writing. Sometimes we did it during class, but other times they just did it on their own. And they were just supposed to set a timer for 10 minutes and free write. And that was that assignment. The other one was an essay that they have to write quite a big essay in the class and learn how to use evidence effectively, kind of for the first time in their education, in English at least. They've probably done this in their language, but maybe not in English. And we have to get used to like plagiarism and like not forgetting to attribute the quote and all of those things. And so there's a lot going on here. And so instead of having them write an essay, turn it in, get feedback on the whole essay, I just made it into a collection assignment where I said, you need to collect a whole essay, and every paragraph that you write, submit, and I will give you feedback for each paragraph as you write it in real time. So they got their feedback from me before they were finished with their essay in each paragraph, or sometimes they would get really excited and turn in 2 or 3 paragraphs at a time because they would just sit and write it all while they were sitting there. And this, I just ended up scaffolding it out so that some things they just free wrote about, and then they had a group document that they used and a breakout room. And then eventually they were writing on their own Google document and writing their essay and combining all the evidence they had found. And by the end of this assignment, I think the total was 4 weeks of like work, little bits of work here and there. And so this is just an example of, this is how many times one of the students turned in their essay. So you can see how many iterations and how engaged the student was with submitting it. So they submitted it so many times. And eventually we got to the point where, you know, I think that student had submitted it more than 20 times with different changes and things. That is high engagement evidence. Even if the student's work was not very good, they were very engaged. And actually the student was one of the best essays in the end product because of so many iterations. And then this is just a sample of how I use the comments in Canvas. So I did annotations, and then I sent screencast videos to the students with feedback, and then they would turn the essay in again. And each time they turned it in, they got a point, collecting that they've interacted with my feedback. And as soon as I saw that they interacted with the feedback, they got the point. All right. So just to kind of sum up the benefits, I felt like this really led to a lot of culturally relevant conversations where students were bringing very vulnerable things to class and we were working them out. And even in their writing ability, they were really bringing a lot of, wow, I didn't realize that I could do this when I write. I didn't realize that I could take it step by step. I thought all essays were just like start from the beginning and write to the end and just spit it all out. So they were having a lot of big ahas about like what it means to write, what it means to write well. And then the students really saw their body of work grow through the semester. By the end, having 50 words is so like, wow, they had all these words. They started with none. And then they really felt that effort was valuable based on their writing and based on other things. And then they could see their growth across the semester. And I didn't get a backup grading snowball. I just had to add that 1 point every time they did the thing. And I could focus my energy on giving them the best feedback that I could give them. The last thing that I'll say before we go to some breakout rooms is that there are a lot of students in non-credit who just decide they're not going to do any writing assignments and they don't come to class on those days. And one of my initial goals was that students could opt in anytime and just start the process. And there was one student who is a DI student and totally not interested in writing. I could tell from the first day, and wouldn't do any signing in, wouldn't do any little free writing prompts, wouldn't do anything. And then somewhere in the middle of the essay, that was the long project where they were supposed to collect paragraphs, he just decided to write a body paragraph one day because he had a lot to say about it. And he ended up writing a very profound essay and then writing another essay that was timed after that, and then writing a final exam essay that was very high quality, lots of critical thinking, excellent work. And he went from not wanting to engage in writing to actually loving writing. And he really articulated, like, it was because I could do the little pieces and get the videos. I needed the videos teacher. And so just those little bits of feedback while the student is still in the middle of the assignment really expands the ability for the student to be able to engage in the assignment.